Dr. Corinne Low, welcome to So Money.
Thanks for having me, Farnish. I can't wait.
Me too. All right, so let's get into it. Your book is called Having It All, and the subtitle is What Data Tells Us About Women's Lives and Getting the Most Out of Yours. Let's be truthful. We have all wizened to the reality that having it all is a myth. At least I think the women in our audience, we get it. But your book offers a fresh set of eyes to this and the data. So let's just start with some of the new revelations about women's lives that you have discovered. You have progressed this concept, right? And you want us to know some new things about that having it all is a myth and dot dot dot.
Yeah, so I approach this from my discipline as an economist who's been studying the economic lives of women for my entire career, 15 years of research. It's all in the book, and my own lived experience and a lot of stories of women who are in the thick of it right there with you for the people who are listening. So what the data shows is that what we are trying to do right now as working women, especially as working moms, is uniquely challenging from a time perspective because we are trying to do more in our careers and our jobs are demanding more from us than ever before. Well, at the same time, gender roles have not changed in the home. So men are doing the same amount of cooking and cleaning as they did in the 1970s. And they do the same amount in the household, no matter who earns more money, a topic that I know that you've looked at. And so even when she's the female breadwinner, she still does twice as much cooking and cleaning. So she doesn't get the relief that her male colleagues get because they have that help at home. And then finally, that the time that we spend with our kids has just exploded. So we're
Yeah.
spending twice as much time with our kids as parents a generation ago. And so all of that adds up to us being very tired, which I know is going
Wow.
to sound familiar.
To say that some of the data did really surprise me. And I don't know if it's because I live on the East Coast in more of these more progressive areas of the country. My husband's very involved. I feel like we'll get to mental load in a moment. I think there is an imbalance there. But I think when it comes to child rearing and things like that, it feels like, look, we're both very tired at the end of the day. So there is that. And we know there's an increasing number of stay-at-home fathers. So how did you go about finding that data, especially around the fact that men are doing as much work, or let's just say the same amount of work as they were in the 70s home?
Well, so I want to make a distinction here between childcare and cooking and cleaning. So what stayed constant is the cooking and cleaning time, which I actually find is a really good proxy for the
Mhm.
mental load because it's this kind of unglamorous work of running a household that you just
Mhm.
have to like keep doing every day, and you don't necessarily get like an intrinsic reward from doing it. Like we like spending time with our kids, but like nobody really likes loading the dishwasher, right? So
Right.
I think that I want to make a distinction there because men's parenting time has increased.
Got it.
But the key thing is because both of us, men and women, have increased our parenting time so much, the gender gap in the household is actually wider. And so psychologically, we have this tendency to compare today's dads to the dads of the past. And we say,
Mhm.
they're doing so much. And those dads are saying, I'm doing so much. I read my kid a bedtime story. My dad never read me a bedtime story. I dropped the kid off at school. My dad never did that, right? And that is actually true. But they are missing the fact that women's time has increased so much more that their wife is actually doing more than her mom did also, right?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
that piece feels a little bit invisible. And so I think that does lead to some of these misunderstandings. And then when it comes to a household that actually gets to the point of being more egalitarian like your household, what I
Mhm.
think is interesting there is that if you were to take that couple and compare them in the data to a couple that had the same earnings split, but the genders were reversed, there you would find it wouldn't be egalitarian. It would be the lower earner, who would be the woman in that case, who would be taking on so much more, right? So what I find is that, when the woman is the breadwinner, that's when it finally does get to be something like 50-50 in parenting. But in a case where the man is the breadwinner, the wife is doing 80%, right?
Yeah.
So there's sort of these like invisible places where on the margin, it's like even with, I think a lot of women are at a point where they're like, okay, this feels okay in my household. And yet still, if I were to compare them to a man in a kind of similar earnings division situation, he has that benefit of his female partner just taking on so much more.
You also write about how we value women's time differently than
Hmm.
men's time. Can you unpack that some more for us?
Well, I started thinking about this as like a more systemic problem. I mean, we all know, right, that there's so much stuff that women do that is economic production that we tend not to assign value to, right? But I started thinking about this as this bigger systemic problem when I would start to talk about outsourcing. And right away, a lot of people would push back and say, like, well, you have to be really rich to do that, or that's not, a practical solution, or like that just doesn't feel right, or it feels,
It's like a values thing too. Like we just don't do that.
we don't do that. And then I said, well, I started asking people, well, do you take your car to the mechanic to get an oil change or do you do it yourself? Your husband changes the oil? And nobody would say their husband changed the oil, right? And yet there was this like instinctive, we didn't categorize that as outsourcing, even though that's absolutely the same thing. Because I think of outsourcing as it's choosing to hire somebody for something that you theoretically could do yourself. And like, really changing your oil is actually not that complicated, right? Like actually everybody could, spend an hour, 2 hours reading the books, watching YouTube and could do it themselves. But we don't hire our husbands to change the oil. And yet we hire ourselves for all of those female coded domestic tasks. And so
Hmm.
that's a place where I almost feel like the same way men are stuck in the 1970s in terms of the amount of cooking and cleaning that they do, that we're a little stuck in the 1970s in terms of this mindset where we haven't updated that our time is now as valuable outside the house as
Hmm.
those husbands of yesteryear when, everybody started deciding we're going to take our car to the mechanic, to change the oil. That transition has happened for the value of women's time now because of the career opportunities that we have today. And therefore, we might be hiring ourselves for too many jobs around the house. And so I don't want to sound out of touch. I know that there are families where there are real financial constraints where this does, really seem impossible to do. But I do push back a little bit because for a lot of the families that say, well, outsourcing isn't financially feasible for us, they are taking the car to the mechanic. They are hiring somebody to clean the gutters, right? They
Right.
are outsourcing for those male coded tasks, but it becomes an unaffordable luxury when it's a female coded task instead.
Well said. Well point. And I love your book because it's not just data. There's great permission slips to do
Hmm.
things with that data. And now, you write about don't lean in, level up. You can say no to your kids if the bedtime routine is taking an hour and a half. You
Hmm.
know, we used to do this. And I just, oh my gosh, my kids are 11 and 8. And up until a couple of weeks ago, we were still sitting outside their rooms,
Yeah.
waiting for them to actually still fall asleep. The logic was, well, they're gonna get up and they're gonna bother us. They may, but they'll learn,
Yeah.
they'll come downstairs, they'll ask for water. But at least when I'm downstairs, I'm getting work done. And then I just usher them back
Right.
upstairs, right? Like we were just it was becoming too much. And so saying no to them and negotiating with your partner. Your book, more women are going to read it likely than men. And something that I came up against when I wrote When She Makes More is that the ultra feminists said to me, "Here we go, a book written for women on how to sort of overcorrect in a male dominated world, in a world built for men, in a patriarchy,
Hmm.
whereas we really need to fix the patriarchy, right?" And I agree, like that is a true statement that we live in a patriarchy, but it's what are we supposed to do? Just fold our hands and women are coming to me asking for help. So this is second best, I suppose, this
No,
book.
100%. And
Right?
second best is like a real like economics concept where we say like, yes, there's like unconstrained optimization. If you were dictator of the world, this is how it would look, right? And then there's how do you optimize within the realities of like the actual world that you're living in? And
Right.
it was so important for me to write that book because it is so easy right now in this moment that we're in to get into this internal death spiral of like, well, I can't change that and I can't change that and that's unfair and that's stacked against me. And then you feel like you have no agency. And I think the reality is like you do still have agency to make things work better for you. And the other thing that because I've read your book, I've told you I've read your book, and what I loved about your book is that your book was trying to make things add up for couples, make things fairer to women who were the breadwinners, while also honoring that most people like want to have a good relationship with their spouse. This isn't a zero-sum game.
Right.
It's not like you're being so unfair to me. I should get this like inch more, and like this is like it's not the
It's not
same.
a scorecard. You're not keeping score, right?
And because so much of the surplus from a relationship comes from like us actually wanting to do things for each other. And when that's reciprocal, there's just tremendous value that can come out of that, right? It's like when it's actually reciprocal, like cooking dinner doesn't have to feel like domestic labor. Cooking dinner can feel like love, one of the ways that you show love, as long as the other person is showing love to you with the things that feel hard to you. They're taking those things off your plate. And so that's what I love about your book. And I think that's exactly the approach that I want to take with mine too, even though listeners who know my personal story know that I read Farnoosh's book at the time when I was the breadwinner in my relationship, married to a man, and I was what I call in my book, winning the bread and baking it too, because I was also doing
and freezing it and then taking it out a year later and then reheating it. Yeah.
And so I ended up, one of my level ups was that I got divorced, and I also moved to a cheaper city and closer to my job. And all of those things have improved my life. But I wanted people reading my book to understand, I'm not saying that you need to blow up these relationships, but I am saying that you need to set and hold on to your boundaries and the things that make you whole. Because so often, like with your story with bedtime, I think as women, we just like give away piece by piece those things that we need to be okay until we've like forgotten. We're like the giving tree, right? We end up as that empty stump. And that just is not how we should be living. And I think so often then the imbalance in our relationship, it's not like there's anyone else to blame. It's not like, oh, it's the patriarchy or it's my husband. It is also our own like lack of self-value to say like my needs are important here, right? And like the fact that I just want to go downstairs and have a cup of tea, that's reason enough to like set the boundary around bedtime.
And you said it, I think it was in an interview on CBS where you were like, me being happy improves my relationship with my son.
Yeah, absolutely.
Surprise.
Yeah, your kids are going to remember more if you were able to be like fun and relaxed and connected with them, then they're going to remember the ways that you twisted yourself into knots to kind of make every little thing perfect, or to do everything yourself versus get the store-bought cupcakes or even the store-bought holiday meal. So,
oh my gosh.
Yes.
They like the store-bought anyway. My kids hate my baking. Oh my gosh. Well, I want to circle back to your personal life, because this has become a bit of a firestorm in the media. The media loves to run with this story, and I want you to tell us the real truth behind it. So I think it was, like the flashiest of flashy headlines, like Dr. Low, divorces her man and marries a woman because she says it made the most economical sense. The data prove that the best way to reach parity in a relationship as a woman is to marry another woman, which is of course like a showstopper. So tell us your path to your next marriage, your current marriage. And obviously this isn't, I don't think you're telling every woman to marry a woman. You believe in, love, and love is love. So, but tell us why it's working out for you.
Yeah. Well, I think I made the mistake of like making a joke that I make a lot, because obviously there is some irony in this fact that I did divorce a man and I got married to a woman, and I have been studying time use in different couples, and that inequality that I see where if a woman is the breadwinner, she's still doing more cooking and cleaning. That's not going to be true in a lesbian relationship. So if you look at lesbian relationships, or if you look at gay male relationships, whoever is the higher earner does less and whoever's the lower earner does more, right? And so, my joke has always been when I present that graph that I'm like, oh, and this is why being a lesbian is an evidence-based decision. Okay. And yes, I thought that was funny. And then that became the big headline around my book
Well,
is
I
that
will take a beat because that is also not ideal, because I've interviewed same-sex couples, and what I have found in that flip where the lower earner does more, they will pull me aside and say, I feel like I got to earn my keep.
mm,
It's not because they're doing it in a lovingly way.
yeah,
They're
yeah,
like, well, how do I prove my worth in
yeah,
this relationship? So it's a little bit more complex than that. I think there's a lot we can learn from same-sex couples
yeah,
when it comes to because where I think it's exemplary, and I've interviewed again many same-sex couples, is that it isn't about who makes what. It's more about we're doing what we want to do because we're either good at it, or one has more
yes.
time to do it, or but just do what they got to do.
Yes, and that's what I like. What I talk about is when you're thinking about division of responsibility, I'm like, I want us to move beyond just fair, and I want us to be asking, is it evidence-based? Is it nourishing to us? And is it sustainable, right? And what
Mm.
I mean by evidence-based is that like how we divide things up should be based on, you know, time availability. And it's not just earnings, but it's whose career needs an investment at a given point, because it could be that the
Right.
wife is actually earning less, but she's earning less because she took time to invest in having kids and breastfeeding those kids. And so now actually her career is the one that needs investment, right? And so that's the, or it could be one partner's in school and they're not earning anything, but they've got to finish their exams because that's what's going to enable them to have a career, right? So, what I did find that is refreshing when now I'm in a same-sex marriage is that you get rid of the assumption, you get rid of gender as one of the structures that makes those decisions for you, right? And so you are left, it's still something to navigate because, for example, like I do earn more in my current marriage, but my wife has a dream job that's a new opportunity for her where like she really needs to prove herself and wants to prove herself, right? And so I am actually doing more at home right now in this moment, but I know that it's not because of my gender, right? And that is a huge help because it means like we are able to say, look, in this moment, your career is the one that needs that extra time. Whereas, like, I'm a tenured professor. Part of the reason that I earn more right now is because I already kind of made it to that milestone. So I don't have that same margin where if I don't prove myself, I'm not getting that next promotion right now. So it's actually okay for me to be the one that like stays home because,
Mm.
the nanny is sick, right? But the issue that I had in a heterosexual marriage was the way it felt like gender was steering the ship that I took a lot of umbrage to because at that point I was pre-tenure. I needed to make that investment to be able to keep my job at Wharton. And when COVID came around, all of my male colleagues who, were married to women, I watched as their wives, no matter what their careers were, no matter what state their job was in, no matter what phase they were in, their wives were the ones who stayed home with the kids because, of course, he's got to keep publishing papers or he's not going to get tenure, right?
Yeah.
But because I was the one as a woman who was on the tenure track, right? And just because I was the woman, I did not get that same benefit in the relationship of it being viewed that my career was a joint asset for both of us, right? I think there's this default where we're used to the man's career pays off for both of us, and we tend not to think of women's careers that way.
Mhm.
So what I would like to see is I would love to be able to see people introduce some of the elements of having a same-sex relationship within their heterosexual
Yeah.
marriages, right? To say like we should be dividing what we do in the home according to strengths, according to preferences, according to needs. We shouldn't be letting gender roles make these decisions. And when you're falling into those defaults, like go ahead and interrogate that because we should be able to evolve past that.
And it's a self-interrogation more times than not because
100%.
it's our own blocks. A lot of times it's it's guilt, or it's like conditioning. I need to do this because I'm mom or I'm
Yeah.
dad, and so you have to catch yourself in the moment.
Yeah, and that's where sometimes, then we also need to ask for our partner's support in sometimes stepping up, maybe even beyond where what their view is, where like, look, I have felt guilty every time I have to go on a work trip, and I've never seen one of my male colleagues agonize the way I've seen my female colleagues agonize about work trips, about needing to leave the kids at home. And
Yeah.
we feel so much guilt about the bedtime, about being able to chaperone the field trip, about being able to, make something home baked. And so sometimes, like if we're in one of those phases where our careers really need investment, one of the things we need from our male partner is one, support in setting and holding our own boundaries and be reminding us, like, look, like you give so much to the kids and you're going to be there tomorrow and next week, but you need to take this opportunity right now. But we also need them to step up because what I hear from my female friends is they say, yes, I am guilting myself to be home at 5 p.m. for dinner time, but that's because I know that my spouse isn't going to do that. My spouse is going to say it's fine for the nanny to feed them dinner, or it's fine for them to have the extra aftercare or whatever every single day. Whereas I'm saying I want us to spend parenting time with them. And so if he's not going to step up, I'm going to do it because I want that to be what our kids get. And I also see that around food where, the mom is the one saying, I really care if they eat something that's healthy, something that's nourishing, something that's balanced. And so, yeah, now I'm killing myself to pack their lunches or to make the home cooked meals. But if I tried to outsource that to my spouse, he would just say takeout, right? He would say, let them eat the school meal. So there's something on us where we need to sometimes adjust our quality standards. We need to sometimes be okay with imperfect, with what I call having it almost.
Yeah.
But supportive partnerships are going to be where our partner says, let me meet you halfway, not just in splitting what I think needs to be done, but in actually like supporting your vision of, what this should look like so that our kids actually have all of their needs met. So our home actually looks nice, right? Because if they just do what they think is strictly necessary, right? That's not really ever going to be half of what's
Yeah.
on our
You're
plates.
just surviving, not thriving. I
Yeah.
love what you say. You're getting a promotion, dear.
Yes, exactly.
Oh my God. That was like my mind. I mean, brilliant, just brilliant.
Yes. So for like the women listening, you're looking to have how to have this conversation. What you're going to say is you're going to be like, look, I don't need a low level junior employee to delegate to. Okay. So you are getting a promotion. You're moving up to senior management. And senior management means you don't call me 5 times from the grocery store. It means that you really figure out how to own and manage this task and everything involved in it. And you're going to work out all of the details. So you're going to look up what's the address of the pediatrician again, right? What
Mhm.
vaccines do they need to
Google
get
it.
this time? You're going to own it all.
When I was deciding when to have children, it was not just a sort of biological question. There's a clock, obviously, but I was also a financial calculus. I wanted to be able to have savings. I wanted to be able to be at a certain place in my career where I could afford to take time off and go ramp back in on
Mm-hmm.
and not feel the consequences. Because I remember being in my 20s and watching women colleagues sacrifice a lot
Mm-hmm.
as they were growing their families at sensitive times in their careers.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what is the advice today? What have you found? Is there data to support more optimal times for women to begin having families,
Well, one
raising
of the
families?
things, my biggest message to women about this is that it is so hard to actually time when we have children, and there's so many factors that are beyond our control that I really think that the foremost concern on this needs to be when works for you and your family, when works for you and your partner, because I just would hate for anyone to be in the position that they try to like time this so optimally and they're like, I'm going to do it exactly when I'm 37. And
Right.
then
Yeah.
they find that they have trouble, right? And maybe it then takes 5 years for them to conceive. And so I think that what is true is that the way I look at careers is that they are a machine that converts our time into money. And the more you invest in that machine and you upgrade it, the better time to money conversion ratio you get, right? And so that's for me, like getting tenure means that now I can put like less time in and I get more money out, right? Out of my career. So if you try to have kids before you've made any of those investments, right? Then at the time when you're most squeezed time wise, you're also not going to have this like, healthy money machine so you're going to end up having to put a lot of time into your career as well, or just not getting enough money out and you're going to feel squeezed that way. So I think it's good to think about what can I do to upgrade my money machine before I have kids. That doesn't mean necessarily delay the timing. It might mean that you're saying, I'm going to be really focused on making those investments for a period before I have kids and trying to kind of achieve this milestone. It also might mean that you want to think about, for those of you where it's financially feasible, freezing eggs or freezing embryos, so that if you have a year in mind, if you're like, oh, I know I want to have kids when I'm 35, but you're going to start having that first kid at 35, well, the data shows that that second kid at 37 or 38 is already putting you in a risky territory where there's a lot of variation. Some women are going to be able to conceive naturally at that age, absolutely no problem. And some women are already going to be encountering fertility struggles at that age. So freezing eggs is a way that's going to give you more option value. It's literally like having a stock option available, right? That you can choose to kind of exercise that option. So that's another thing that people might want to consider. But I pretty strongly counsel against saying that like I have to try to find this optimal time, because the reality is, and I just have to be frank, you are going to take a hit in your career. That's what the data shows. And it's not, I don't look at it as like a penalty, right? When you have children, and if I studied your credit card statement, I would see that you would suddenly be spending less money on, nights out, fancy dinners, alcohol, and you'd be spending more money on diapers and, baby clothes, right? And toys and Montessori themed toys. So it's the same thing with your time. It's that when you have kids, you have this other place to invest your time. So you invest less of it in your own human capital for a short period of time, and you invest more of it in the child's human capital. It's just like that spending reallocation, right? So it's a choice of where to invest your time, because you get really high returns to investing time in your child's human capital. And there's economic models that show this. And so I don't look at it as a penalty. I look at it as this shift in priorities, but kind of knowing that's true, it can be smart to bank some of those investments before you decide to kind of start shifting your attention.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the future. Right now, women and couples are choosing to have fewer children for a host of reasons. Money, one of them, but just also like preference. They're looking at the world and the future and they're like, nope, and don't want to bring a kid into the world. So speaking of, have you been looking at things like AI and how the future technologically might shift the workload and the having it all paradigm for women and couples? Is any of your data dovetailing any of that right now?
Yeah, you know what? What's so interesting is that as much as people devalue the work that women do, it's really hard to replace it with AI, right? So when you think about like the work that women do, both the kind of like fine-grained work around the household, like there's a video of like a robot trying to load a dishwasher, and
I
it turns out
saw
it's like
that. It
it's
was so
really hard
slow.
for a robot to load a dishwasher, right?
My husband showed it to me. It was like at a 100 speed, and
Yeah.
it was fast foot, like sped up, but at normal speed, it was so slow. It took him like a day to clear the table.
Yeah. So this is actually like these tasks are actually really hard. And so like we're not getting rid of a lot of these tasks. But then when you think about the mental load, when you think
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
knowing everybody's calendars, knowing everybody's teachers, knowing which child needs what, helping our kids with their homework, we are very hard to replace in those domains. And so I think that piece of it, like AI is not going to save us from
For
that.
better or worse. I mean,
One of the shocks that's happening that I think is going to be hard is that AI is continuing to displace male labor. And that means that this reality of we're going to have two incomes, or we're going to have families that are relying on women's income, right? That is going to continue to be the case. And that's why I think we need to learn to create households that aren't so reliant on gender roles, because it's just so inefficient. And I see this in the data, where the woman is earning 4 times as much at her job and she's still working fewer hours and doing twice as much housework because the man is still working more hours, even though he's earning so much less, right? And that just isn't efficient in the household in terms of making the whole household richer. I joke that, like, if he would pick up the kids from daycare, she could pick up a shift as a nurse, right? Because that's often what I see in the data, right? It could be a couple where, he's a truck driver and she's a nurse, and he's working more hours even when her hourly wage is higher. So AI is really going to force us to confront those gender roles, because it's going to mean that, there are industries that are going to be displaced. There are places where you used to kind of have reliable earnings where you're not, and women's income is just going to continue to be so important.
Yeah.
And then for the young people out there who are like, well, how do I plot a career where there are these kind
Yeah.
of huge potential changes and disruptions coming? I think my advice there is to think about the skills that are durable and transferable to different industries, right? So skills like really being good at leadership and communication and synthesizing information and working with a team. These are skills that are very difficult to replace with AI, and they're transferable to a lot of different industries. So even if, the software industry takes a hit, right, you can bring those skills to the consumer packaged goods industry. So
Right.
I think there's still every reason to invest a lot in human capital. Anytime there is a technology that changes, there is a certain group of people who it displaces, but there's a certain group of people whose time it makes more valuable, because now
Mhm.
you're kind of more productive because of this play between the technology and the human labor, because it can't really fully get rid of the humans. You still need that kind of senior management level, right? So there are still so many places for young people to invest in their careers, but I do think you have to avoid kind of being so narrowly focused that there's only one job that you can do, because none of us can predict exactly where all of this dust is going to settle. And that's the same when it comes to within a marriage. Like, the problem is, if men are just focused on, all I know how to do is earn a paycheck, right? Then they don't have the full set of skills that you need to be a partner, no matter what the future holds, no matter how our economy evolves. Because we might not need you to play the role of breadwinner. We might need you to play the role of, chief people officer in the household.
Right, right,
And I
right.
need you to have skills for that too.
Well, if anyone just wants to come to my house and make lunch for my kids in the morning, I'm hiring, because I did the math. I was like, that's like 300 meals, that I make, or whatever it is. And that's just one meal
Yes.
a day. It's just Corinne. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. Please write a follow-up to this book. And I hope that the data will be better in 30 years.
In the right direction. And the thing that gives me hope is actually exactly what you referenced about people being worried that, saying, do we want to get married? Do we want to have kids at all? And I think because surveys show that marriage and partnership is so important to men, so they're going to have to figure out that they need to step up if they want to keep getting married and having children. So I have a lot of hope for the future. I just think it's going to be a little bit of a bumpy transition, because it's always hard to learn new skills. But, like, men out there, I believe in you. I think that you can handle this promotion.
Yes. Co-CEO,
Yeah.
Dr. Corinne Low, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. I knew this was going to be a good one. And happy holidays.
Thank you so much, Farnoosh.